Look at their faces. Every single one of them knew. The acrobats balanced in perfect formation, the strong men standing rigid, the clowns without their smiles. 37 people arranged before that massive tent, staring into the camera like prisoners staring at their executioner. You can see it in their eyes. The terror, the acceptance. They knew that in 6 hours they would all be dead. And yet they stood there, frozen, unable to run, unable to scream, as the photographer captured the last moment of their lives. This is the story of Von Heller's circus, and the photograph that documented their doom, that if you want to know what really happened that October day in 1894, keep watching. And if this story sends chills down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe, because the truth is far darker than you can imagine. There exists a photograph that shouldn't exist. Taken on October 3rd, 1894, it shows the complete troupe of Von Heller's circus standing before their grand tent in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 37 faces stare back at the camera, frozen in time. Every single person in that photograph would be dead within 6 hours. The image itself is unremarkable at first glance. A traveling circus poses for a group portrait, standard practice for the era. But look closer and something feels profoundly wrong. The smiles don't reach anyone's eyes. Every performer holds their expression too stiffly, as though someone threatened them into position. In the back row, near the tent's entrance, there's a shadow that doesn't match any figure present. Some say it looks like a person. Others claim it resembles something far less human. The photograph was discovered 3 days after the disaster by a Milwaukee journalist named Thomas Wardell, who found the glass plate negative perfectly intact among the smoking ruins. Everything else had burned to ash. Von Heller's circus wasn't just any traveling show. It was known across the Midwest as the circus that never disappointed. The circus that seemed to possess performers of impossible talent. They arrived in Milwaukee on September 28th, setting up their massive tent on the outskirts of town near the industrial district. For 5 days, they performed to packed crowds. Children screamed with delight. Adults gasped at feats they couldn't explain. The newspapers called it the greatest spectacle Wisconsin had ever seen. But those who worked at the circus told different stories. Behind the velvet curtains and painted smiles, Von Heller ran his operation with iron rules. Performers weren't allowed to speak to outsiders. They lived in their wagons, isolated from the towns they visited. At night, strange sounds echoed from the animal cages, sounds that didn't match any known creature. And Von Heller himself, a tall man with coal-black eyes and a voice like grinding metal, seemed to appear and disappear like smoke. Nobody knew where he came from. Nobody dared ask. The photograph was taken at 3 in the afternoon, just before the final show. The photographer was a local man named Henry Schultz, hired to create promotional materials for the circus's next stop in Chicago. He later told police that the session felt wrong from the start. The performers moved like puppets. Von Heller stood behind Schultz the entire time, breathing down his neck, whispering instructions that Schultz couldn't quite hear, but somehow understood. When Schultz suggested the troupe relax their poses, Von Heller's hand clamped down on his shoulder with crushing force. After taking the photograph, Schultz packed his equipment and left as quickly as possible. He never returned for payment. He never developed the negative. When authorities found him after the disaster, he was in his darkroom, doors locked, repeating the same phrase over and over. They had already been chosen. They had already been marked. The photograph proves it. In the years since, researchers have examined the image countless times. Some claim to see faces in the shadows that surround the tent. Others point to the unnatural darkness gathering at the edges of the frame, as though the light itself was retreating from what was about to happen. But perhaps the most disturbing detail is this. If you count the figures in the photograph very carefully, you'll find 38 people, not 37. The extra person appears in no circus records. Nobody knows who they were, and their face, barely visible in the back corner, shows an expression of absolute terror. Johann von Heller arrived in America in 1889, or so the stories go. His accent suggested German origins, but native speakers claimed his dialect matched no known region. He purchased a failing circus in Pennsylvania for an undisclosed sum and transformed it within months. Performers from across the country flocked to join his troupe, drawn by promises of fame and fortune. Those who auditioned and were rejected considered themselves lucky afterward. Those who were accepted never left. The circus operated under strict rules posted inside every wagon and tent. Rule 1. Performers never speak about their past lives. Rule 2. All contracts last exactly 5 years, no exceptions. Rule 3. Nobody leaves the grounds without Von Heller's permission. Rule 4. The East Wagon remains locked at all times. Rule 5. Never look Von Heller directly in the eyes during a full moon. Most troubling was Rule 6. If you hear your name called 3 times in the night, do not answer. Do not investigate. Stay in your wagon until dawn. By 1894, Von Heller's circus had become legendary. Their tightrope walker, a woman known only as Katerina, performed without a net at heights that made audiences faint. Their strongman, a hulking figure called Magnus, bent iron bars into sculptures while blindfolded. The clown troupe performed skits that made children laugh until they cried, then kept laughing until parents grew concerned. And then there were the animals. Von Heller's menagerie included specimens that naturalists couldn't identify. A cat with too many eyes, a horse whose hooves never touched the ground, an elephant that seemed to understand human speech perfectly. Former circus workers, those who managed to escape before their contracts ended, told disturbing tales. A juggler named Peter Marsh left in 1892 and spent his remaining years in an asylum, claiming Von Heller wasn't human. A seamstress named Dorothy Price disappeared in 1893 after attempting to flee. Her body was found 3 states away, positioned as though she'd been running but frozen mid-stride. The coroner's report noted her expression showed recognition, as if she'd seen someone she knew in her final moment. The performers in Milwaukee that October included several who'd tried to leave. The tightrope walker Katerina had been with the circus for 4 years and 11 months. Just 1 month remained on her contract. She'd confided to a fellow performer that Von Heller had promised her freedom, but she no longer believed him. The ringmaster, Cornelius Black, had served for exactly 5 years. His contract ended October 4th, the day after the photograph. He'd been planning his departure for months. The animal handler, a quiet man named Thomas Gray, had discovered something in the East Wagon 2 weeks prior. He'd stopped speaking entirely afterward. On October 2nd, the day before the photograph, witnesses reported strange occurrences at the circus grounds. A local boy claimed he saw performers moving through the camp late at night, walking in perfect circles around the main tent. They moved for hours without stopping, without speaking, like sleepwalkers trapped in a ritual. A night watchman from a nearby factory heard singing coming from the circus around midnight. Not happy songs, but a low, droning chant in a language he'd never heard. The sound made his teeth ache. That same night, Katerina broke Rule 6. She heard her name called 3 times. She answered. The morning of October 3rd began with an argument. Performers gathered outside Von Heller's private wagon, their voices rising in rare defiance. Katerina stood at the front, her tightrope walking costume already on, her face pale but determined. She refused to perform. For the first time in 5 years, she was saying no. The other performers shifted nervously, some supporting her, others watching the wagon door with obvious fear. Von Heller emerged slowly, his tall frame unfolding from the doorway like a spider leaving its web. He said nothing at first. He simply looked at Katerina with those coal black eyes, and one by one, the supporting performers backed away. But Katerina held her ground. She told him she'd seen something the night before when she answered her name. She'd seen what waited for them all. She'd seen the truth about the 5-year contracts. Von Heller listened without expression. Then he smiled, and witnesses later described that smile as the most frightening thing they'd ever seen. He told Katerina she would perform. He told her they would all perform. And then he said something that made everyone within earshot go silent. He said the photograph at 3 o'clock was mandatory. He said it would be their legacy. He said history would remember them forever. The way he spoke those words, it sounded less like a promise and more like a threat. After Von Heller returned to his wagon, Katerina collapsed. She had to be carried to her quarters by Magnus and another strongman. She kept whispering the same thing over and over. They're not animals in those cages. They're us. They're what we become. Throughout the morning, other performers tried to warn each other in subtle ways. The clowns painted their faces with tears instead of smiles, earning harsh reprimands. The juggler deliberately dropped his pins 3 times, a signal of distress known among circus folk. The animal handlers fed the creatures early, as though preparing for a long absence. Even the ticket seller, an elderly man named Morton who'd been with Von Heller since the beginning, told arriving customers that today's show might be their last chance. He phrased it as a sales tactic, but his eyes told a different story. At noon, a local priest named Father Michael O'Connor arrived at the circus grounds. He'd heard confessions from several performers over the past few days, and their stories disturbed him deeply. They spoke of souls being traded, of contracts written in something darker than ink, of Von Heller's true nature. Father O'Connor demanded to speak with Von Heller. He was granted an audience. 15 minutes later, he left the wagon ashen-faced, clutching his Bible with shaking hands. He told his parish later that he'd tried to bless Von Heller and the man hadn't burned, hadn't recoiled. Instead, Von Heller had laughed and said that God had no jurisdiction in places of wonder and spectacle. By 2 o'clock, the photograph session approached. Performers dressed in their finest costumes, applying makeup with trembling hands. Some wrote letters to families they hadn't contacted in years, hiding them in their wagons. Others prayed quietly. Magnus, the strongman, carved names into the support beam of the main tent, names of performers who disappeared over the years. Henry Schultz arrived at 3 o'clock sharp with his camera equipment, setting up before the main tent. The performers assembled slowly, arranging themselves in rows as Von Heller directed. Every face showed strain. Every smile looked painted on. Schultz noticed immediately that something was wrong. The air itself felt thick, oppressive. The shadows fell at strange angles despite the afternoon sun. and Von Heller's presence behind him felt like standing next to an open grave. The photograph took only minutes, but Schultz later said it felt like hours. He counted 37 people in his viewfinder, but kept sensing a 38th presence just beyond his peripheral vision. When he tried to look directly at it, his eyes watered and his head pounded. Von Heller's whispers continued throughout, words that Schultz couldn't remember afterward, but that made his hands shake while working the camera. The glass plate captured the image, and Schultz packed his equipment with desperate speed. Several performers watched him leave with obvious envy. At 4 o'clock, the gates opened for the final show. Nearly 800 people packed into the tent, the largest crowd Von Heller's circus had drawn in Milwaukee. Families filled the wooden benches. Children ate candied apples. Nobody noticed the performers' strained expressions or the way they glanced repeatedly at the tent's exits. Nobody noticed Von Heller standing in the shadows, perfectly still, watching his creation with satisfaction. The show began with the clowns, their routine darker than usual. They performed a skit about a man who made a deal he couldn't escape, their makeup running from sweat or tears. The audience laughed uncomfortably. Next came Magnus, bending iron bars while tears streamed down his face. The crowd applauded, assuming it was part of the act. The animal parade followed, and several audience members later reported feeling uneasy about the creatures. One woman swore the elephant looked directly at her and mouthed the word help. At 5 o'clock, Katerina climbed to the high wire. She stood on the platform for a long moment, looking down at the crowd, then at Von Heller in the shadows. Witnesses disagree about what happened next. Some say she jumped. Others say she simply stepped off the platform, arms spread wide, as though welcoming what came next. She fell in complete silence. The audience screamed. Von Heller didn't move. Katerina's body hit the ground with a sound like thunder. Chaos erupted immediately. Parents grabbed their children. Men rushed toward the exits, but the tent flaps had been tied shut from the outside. The ropes securing the massive canvas structure suddenly loosened, and the tent began to collapse inward. People trampled each other, trying to escape. In the confusion, someone knocked over a lantern. Fire caught the dry canvas instantly, racing up the walls faster than any natural flame. The tent became an inferno within minutes. Screaming filled the air. Smoke choked everyone inside. The performers, instead of fleeing, stood frozen in place as though held by invisible chains. Von Heller remained in his spot, watching his circus burn, watching his performers die. As the flames reached him, witnesses outside reported seeing him smile once more before the smoke obscured everything. By 9 o'clock that evening, nothing remained but smoking ruins and bodies. Milwaukee's fire brigade arrived too late to save anyone. The tent had burned so hot that the metal poles melted. The wooden benches turned to ash. Of the 800 audience members, only 12 survived by cutting through the canvas with pocket knives. Of the 37 circus performers, none escaped. Their bodies were found in odd positions, arranged almost ceremonially around the tent center where Von Heller's body should have been. But Von Heller's remains were never found. The investigation began immediately. Police Detective Samuel Morrison led the inquiry, interviewing survivors and examining the wreckage. The survivor testimonies didn't match. Some claimed the tent flaps were tied shut deliberately. Others insisted they'd simply jammed in the panic. Some remembered seeing performers standing motionless as flames consumed them. Others recalled desperate attempts to escape. The inconsistencies troubled Morrison deeply, suggesting mass hysteria or something worse. Thomas Wardell, the journalist who found the photograph, published a series of articles about the disaster. His first piece focused on the mysterious circumstances surrounding the fire. His second examined Von Heller's background, discovering that no immigration records existed for anyone by that name. His third article, published October 6th, detailed the photograph itself and the eerie details visible in the image. Wardell's obsession with the case would consume the rest of his life. He died in 1902, his apartment walls covered with notes about Von Heller's circus. The bodies of the performers were examined by the county coroner, Dr. Elias Brennan. His official report noted standard causes of death by smoke inhalation and burns. His private notes, discovered years later, told a different story. Dr. Brennan wrote that several bodies showed signs of rigor mortis that preceded the fire by hours. He wrote that some performers' faces displayed expressions of release rather than fear. Most disturbing, he noted that every single body had identical marks on their left wrists, small brands in a symbol he couldn't identify. Henry Schultz developed the photograph 3 weeks after the fire, finally gathering the courage to enter his darkroom. The image emerged from the chemicals perfectly clear, showing every detail with unnatural sharpness. Schultz counted the figures again and again, each time arriving at 38. He took the photograph to authorities, but they dismissed his concerns. To them, it showed 37 people, the exact number of deceased performers. Schultz's insistence on the extra figure made them question his mental state. Several survivors experienced psychological breaks following the disaster. A young woman named Sarah Mitchell spent 6 months in a sanitarium, claiming she could still hear the performers singing in that strange language. A man named Robert Chun insisted that Von Heller appeared in his dreams every night, smiling and promising that the show would return. A boy who'd escaped with his father refused to speak for 2 years, communicating only through drawings of a tall man with black eyes watching from shadows. The circus wagons were sold at auction. Most burned under mysterious circumstances within a year. The East wagon, the one mentioned in Von Heller's rules, was purchased by a collector. 131 years have passed since that October evening in Milwaukee. The photograph of Von Heller's circus remains one of the most analyzed images in American tragedy. Researchers continue to debate its mysteries. Paranormal investigators claim it's cursed. Skeptics call it a historical curiosity blown out of proportion by grief and superstition. But the photograph itself refuses to provide easy answers. Modern analysis has revealed details invisible to the naked eye. Digital enhancement shows that shadow behind the performers does indeed resemble a human figure, but with proportions that don't quite match. The faces of the performers, when examined closely, show pupils dilated in ways inconsistent with the bright afternoon light. Several figures display subtle distortions, as though they were moving during the exposure despite the image's sharpness. Most puzzling, spectrographic analysis of the original glass plate negative reveals traces of chemicals that shouldn't exist in 1894 photography. The location of the circus grounds in Milwaukee is now a parking lot, but locals avoid it after dark. Multiple businesses have tried to establish themselves there, all failing within months. Employees report feeling watched. Security cameras malfunction repeatedly. Some claim to hear music at night, the sound of a calliope playing tunes that make listeners feel profoundly sad. In 2003, a construction crew digging for new foundations discovered charred tent poles buried 15 feet deep, far deeper than the original fire could have reached. Von Heller himself remains an enigma. Despite extensive research by historians and genealogists, no record of Johann von Heller exists before 1889. Immigration documents don't list him. Census records show no trace. His circus appeared fully formed, as though it materialized from nowhere. After the fire, several witnesses claimed to see a tall man matching his description in different cities, always near circuses or traveling shows. These sightings continued for decades, despite the impossibility of one man living that long. The fate of the East Wagon provides its own mystery. The collector who purchased it, a wealthy eccentric named Harrison Whitmore, kept it locked in his estate's carriage house. 3 months after acquisition, Whitmore disappeared. His staff found the wagon's door open, the interior completely empty except for 38 photographs pinned to the walls. Each photograph showed a person's face, expressions frozen in terror. None of the faces matched von Heller's performers, but several matched people who'd gone missing near traveling circuses over the previous 5 years. The photograph's most unsettling aspect remains that 38th figure. Thomas Wardell spent years trying to identify it before his death. He became convinced it represented death itself, present in the image because it already claimed the performers before the fire. Others theorize it's von Heller's true form, briefly visible to the camera but invisible to human eyes. Some claim it's a victim from a previous circus disaster, trapped in von Heller's service. The truth, like so many aspects of this story, remains unknowable. What we can say with certainty is this: the photograph didn't just document von Heller's circus in its final hours. It captured something darker, something that suggests those performers knew their fate long before the flames. Whether von Heller was a man who made terrible choices, or something that wore human form to pursue darker purposes, we may never know. But the photograph endures, 38 faces frozen in time, forever hours before death, forever trapped in that October afternoon when the circus came to its inevitable end.